Welcome to the ICE 2019 education session in the sunny Florida with a beautiful view of Clearwater. The webinar version might turn out to be more tempting considering the view and the weather outside here. Okay, let's get started. I am Pranav Patel, the founder and CEO of MediTechSafe. MediTechSafe provides a software platform for managing medical device cybersecurity risk. I must mention that to address the conflict of interest. I will not cover any aspect of our solution in this presentation at all. So before we get started, I would like for you to write down two simple questions on a piece of paper. First, how frequently do you think about cybersecurity in your context? Is it daily, weekly, monthly, or even annually? Second, how prepared do you feel your organization is to these growing threats? Keep these questions in your mind as you go through the presentation. Eventually, you'd come to know how much sense of urgency is required or what areas you'd pay more attention to in your context. So let's get started by first calibrating ourselves to the environment. We see growing cybersecurity risk due to increasing geopolitical tension. Some of our adversaries know that impacting economic well-being of a country is a good way to gain some attention. And recent news items highlight the point. For example, select groups in China are believed to have breached IBM and HP. These are the large managed security service providers. Through attacking them, they hacked into their large clients. We hear about some of the Russian groups to have hacked home internet routers. We all know about the WannaCry attacks in 2017. They were believed to be originated from North Korea. It is understood that Iranian groups have significantly increased their hacking capabilities. And to sum it all up, France says that cyber war has begun and they will hack first. So the wars will now be fought in the cyber domain. Is that a science fiction? Well, we know that Department of Homeland Security and FBI both have sent out alerts and warnings. So it's not that fictitious. In fact, not a week goes by without us hearing about some sort of data breach, is it? We all have heard about breaches faced by Uber, Dunkin' Donuts, DoorDash, Panera Bread, Adidas, so on and so forth. Most of us have stayed in Marriott at some point. In fact, recently we learned that 2.2 billion people's login and passwords have been floated onto the dark web. Maybe yours included. You should check it out. The news about automakers is interesting. They're attacked for the intellectual property or even trade secrets. We never wish for 9/11 type of situation to ever repeat, but gaining access to airport security for 10 bucks, really? The cyber events also impact leaders personally. Someone has analyzed to say that 31% of the time, people get fired after data breach. And C-level is probably more vulnerable in this situation. Healthcare data breaches are becoming more or less common recurrence, as you see with the recent case in Indiana and a large attack last year at the Atrium Health in North Carolina. So while data breaches aren't desired at all, the consequences of having devices used in our daily lives hacked could be much worse. We refer to these devices as Internet of Things devices, and they're part of our smart homes, smart factories, etc. So imagine hackers spy on us using baby monitors, or having our smart fridge being used for mining bitcoins without us knowing. This is classic. IoT-enabled vacuum cleaner to spy on people. People have also demonstrated how easy it is to hack into cars. So in general, all IoT applications are at risk because cybersecurity has been an afterthought in most of these cases. Worse yet, What if our critical infrastructures start to malfunction due to cyber attacks? The impact could be devastating. It seems that select Russian groups have continued to probe our power grid. There have been attacks on aerospace companies that have been known by Department of Justice. We hear about water infrastructure being targeted. And according to this week's news, Germany feels its infrastructures are vulnerable. Because someone forgot to timely patch a router, US military documents were hacked. And in fact, NASA became victim of cyber attack late last year. But this one tops the list. The future of murder is computer hacking. This is close to home in healthcare with all these medical devices. So we must ask a question. What is the likelihood of our respective organization facing an attack? Let's add a couple of more facts to the list. About 120 million new malwares are discovered every year. That's roughly 300,000 daily. Also, new malware targeting IoT devices grew 200% in this past year. So some of that has sensitized me to think about cybersecurity on all aspects of my life and interactions. But we care about healthcare. So what does it mean for healthcare? Well, healthcare is by far the most breached vertical of all. In fact, Department of Homeland Security ranks it as one of the most targeted and susceptible infrastructure of all when comparing to power, water, transportation, etc. The ECRI has ranked ransomware and cybersecurity as #1 health tech hazard for the last couple of years in a row. So many of us wonder why. Anna Werner, an investigative journalist, has done a fantastic job making the point very clear. Let's watch this video before we discuss how we operationalize cybersecurity in our environment.
A new report shows an increase in computer attacks targeting people's medical records. ProTennis, that's a firm that helps healthcare companies protect data, says there were 222 hacking incidents last year. Now, that's up nearly 25% from 2017. In all, more than 11 million patient records were affected. Anna Werner shows us how some of those records are being bought and then sold on the black market. That's not good. Anna, good morning.
No, it's not good, Gail. In addition to your doctor's notes, your medical records can contain sensitive information like your date of birth, along with credit card and social security numbers. As healthcare providers store this information digitally, some have left their files vulnerable to being exposed. We spoke with a victim of medical identity theft who showed us just how much damage that can do.
It was quite a tumultuous decade of a mess.
The mess started in 2004 for Brandon Regan, when, as a young Marine, he lost his wallet. Months later,
your mother calls and she says what?
Local authorities were here looking for you today, regarding this incident.
Which was a
car theft, multiple car thefts at the time.
Someone posing as Regan was allegedly stealing cars and getting multiple medical procedures. Then the hospitals came after Regan to pay.
This is a collection agency who's sending a bill.
So this is the first one. So this one is, the balance says it's $2,236.
The bills added up to nearly $20,000.
You tried to get these problems off your credit report.
I did.
Did that work?
It worked until the next billing cycle.
So this was like a never-ending battle, and not the kind of battle that you in the Marine Corps are trained to handle.
Yes, ma'am.
But Gary Cantrell sees it all the time as head of investigations at the Health and Human Services Department's Office of Inspector General.
Every one of our investigations involves the use of medical data to commit this fraud.
He warns thieves want people's medical records.
It's just a treasure trove of all this information about you.
Last year alone, he says the agency handled nearly 400 reports of medical data breaches. Some of that information winds up for sale on the internet's dark web.
Sometimes they're compromising this data, and we don't know how it's being used, when or if it will be used to compromise those individuals' identities.
So it's kind of sitting out there like a time bomb,
That's right.
potentially.
That's right.
So how easy is it for criminals to get hold of patients' files? We asked cybersecurity expert Gary Milievsky.
How long did it take us here to find medical records on the dark web?
Took me a few seconds.
Yeah, like literally like 3 seconds.
Yeah.
This seller offered children's health records for sale.
USA Kids full records from a pediatrician?
From the years 2000 to 2014.
Another posted an entire hospital's worth of files.
Healthcare database from Georgia, 397,000 patient records. It's a
397,000 patient records in a healthcare database is what they're selling.
Exactly.
So how are they getting the records?
Their quote unquote product description says breached a very large hospital recently.
Exactly.
So they're basically saying somebody hacked into this hospital and here's the records if you want to buy them for 26 grand.
Exactly. They want to monetize these records quickly, and they're actually offering them at a discount compared to other prices I've seen on the dark web.
Social Security numbers sell for $1, and credit card info goes for up to $110. But Experian reports full medical records can command up to $1,000 because they're an identity thief's dream.
So I'm looking at the details, right? It says date of birth, place of birth, credit card details, social security number, your address, emails.
The 3-digit code on the back of the card.
Right. I mean, so this is really all they need if they buy this.
Exactly.
And then they can become
you.
And hackers have stolen millions of records. A breach at Anthem Insurance affected 78 million people, and a hack at UCLA Health exposed more than 4 million patient records. Despite that, a 2017 survey of healthcare providers found just 16% reported having a fully functional cybersecurity program.
One of our most important missions is to mitigate that vulnerability as quickly as possible, and that means communicating with those individuals who oversee the systems.
As for Brandon Regan, the crook who stole his identity served time in prison. But 15 years later, Regan says he still hasn't been able to undo all of the damage.
That hospital may still have his information, his blood type, under my name at that hospital, but
That's kind of worrisome.
it is just a little weird to think.
Well, because of situations like that, experts we spoke with say it's a good idea to request a copy of your medical files now to clear up any confusion if your records are altered later due to medical identity theft, which is
A lot of information on the medical records. I never thought about your 3-digit code is on your medical record.
And a lot of the
Thinking
onus is
about
on
that.
us, right?
as usual.
Yeah.
This is the thing, right? So if doctors and hospitals' offices don't have adequate security, they communicate with other entities in the medical world, then, you know, they all have different security systems. There's potential for hacking.
And that's such a shame because having digital medical records has been such a benefit to so many people.
It's so convenient,
Yeah,
right? But
exactly.
it comes with the risk.
Until they steal your identity.
So many-
And then it's not
That ain't
convenient at all.
Well, Anna, thanks so much.
That was sobering, wasn't it? Only 16% of providers have good cybersecurity programs in place. Healthcare is probably the most complex and dynamic environment, with integration within and across multiple entities, such as imaging centers, outpatient centers, so on and so forth, across hospitals. Now, government is getting more engaged. In fact, Health and Human Services and FDA have released guidelines recently. There are bills in the Senate, such as Cybersecurity Disclosure Act, that could help enhance awareness of the challenge, Medical Device Cybersecurity Act, IoT Cybersecurity Improvement Act, so on and so forth. In fact, the OCR penalty to the providers are now averaging at $2.5 million over the last couple of years. So it is a material impact, let alone the chaos of managing the situation after a breach happens and a reputational damage. So the point of all that is the likelihood of an organization facing cyber attack has increased in the recent time. Let's not think about IT versus OT security. OT is operational technology such as medical devices. Medical equipment are very much core to the patient care. Imaging having to take vital signs without medical devices. Difficult, isn't it? So one of the healthcare igniters put things in a good perspective. She said, Pranav, we could probably find the courage to deal with the theft of our credit card or even medical records, but it'd be heartbreaking to even think that a ventilator stops to operate when our loved ones is using it or is in use of that device. patient safety is at immediate risk with a medical device breach and malfunctioning. That's not to say medical record breach doesn't lead to patient safety, because an altered prescription medication could also have an adverse event. But in general, when it comes to medical devices, prevention is of the most importance in general. Just quickly, some of the recent surveys have confirmed adverse patient impact, inappropriate therapy being delivered, and attackers taking control of the medical devices, an outcome of cyber attack on medical device. A study at University of California put a number on that. They said up to 1,000 patients are believed to have faced adverse health incidents. When a clinician explains the scenario, it becomes much clearer. Dr. Christoph, an emergency medicine physician, highlights how important it is to provide antibiotic in a timely manner, let's say to a patient with pneumonia. X-ray offers the mechanism to detect pneumonia. If the X-ray machine wasn't available because of a cyber attack, the patient's pneumonia wouldn't be detected and treatment wouldn't be provided in a timely manner. That could easily lead to a serious patient care implication. And that's serious. People often ask, have medical devices really been impacted? Those in the health technology management have likely seen the screen from last year's WannaCry attack. The screen popped up and it said, here's the time by which you transfer amount to the given Bitcoin address. Here's the Bitcoin address. And if you didn't transfer the amount by this time, we'll lock your system or delete the data. And attacks is not only limited to that. We've seen Conflicker, NotPetya, OrangeWorm. Many of these attacks have had different versions of ransomware or malfunctioning of medical devices. You'd probably enjoy this brief video. So you could have all the fancy tools, but if the door really opens in a different direction, those fancy tools or locks are ineffective. So finding an effective solution is just as important to the problem that you're trying to solve. And that turns out to be the case with medical devices. These are some of the examples highlighted in HIPAA journal. These three organizations had all state-of-the-art tools, starting from enterprise-grade firewall, intrusion detection, endpoint security, so on and so forth. Yet, the medical devices such as X-ray machine, PACS, MRI, respiratory gating systems were breached. And the reasons were the old vulnerabilities that were never remediated. And it allowed backdoors into the network. We still know of the cases where we keep buying imaging equipment with Windows XPs, don't we? You know, Windows XP stopped supporting a long time ago. For many years, medical devices were kept outside of security practices, so they have accumulated many vulnerabilities, and those have to be paid attention to. There are reasons why devices were not subject to typical IT security practices. There are real clinical implications and considerations. For example, typically we'd like to scan devices for vulnerabilities, put security agents, encrypt the data, etc., etc., etc. It is, however, important to know that medical devices could shut down or reboot during a scan. And if you had patients on those devices scheduled at that time, you run a patient safety risk. Putting agents may not be compliant unless manufacturers have validated the clinical performance. And in fact, most of the manufacturers would void the warranty if you do those things. Encryption can add latency, and that could be problematic in some of the clinical use cases. So before we encrypt the data, we must understand the clinical implications in a given use case. So in general, while many of the IT security practices can be applied to medical devices, further considerations are needed for patient safety purposes. So we covered 2 points so far. First, likelihood of cyber attack is increasing in this connected world. Second, cybersecurity of medical devices require very specific considerations. So let's now understand how medical devices can be attacked. Being an engineer, I like to see how one can take a device down. There are at least 8 ways, and likely more. One can steal a device with the patient health information, very easy. If there is no communication authentication, it could allow unauthorized sources to have access to the system. Someone can tinker settings from the panel directly. You can have open USB ports, open DICOM, unpatched operating system or softwares. You get the point. Resolving these vulnerabilities require a look at many things, starting from device itself to how the device is connected to the network, as well as processes and policies in the organization. Some of these things have real and material cost implications. So let's look at an example. Typical life cycle of an operating system is about 10 years. First 5 years for mainstream support and 5 years for extended support. But typically, once an operating system is released, that's when a device manufacturer will start to design a product around that. It would take about a couple of years for a manufacturer to design, develop, go through a certification process, and bring in a marketplace. There's obviously some manufacturing ramp time. And also, not everyone will buy the product as soon as it is released, right? So if someone bought a product 5 to 6 years out, once the operating system is released, they're effectively getting 4 to 5 years of a life cycle before worrying about security concerns. Manufacturers are likely not going to stop producing this product because they themselves have to recoup their R&D and at least make some returns. So buyer may end up with a trade-off of either buying a new system after 4 or 5 years of a life, or probably taking a risk on potentially data security or patient safety concern. And that actually has cost implications. So for example, a general purpose ultrasound with a price tag of $10,000 traditionally would have cost an organization $15,000 of a life cycle value for 10-year life. With the security implications and having to manage vulnerability over the life cycle, that cost is now 35% higher. Now, if they actually had to replace the device early, the lifecycle cost is almost double. So thinking about the number of devices a facility has, 35 to 100% increase in lifecycle cost of medical devices could be very material. In our work with imaging centers, we've seen about 30% of imaging medical devices are being vulnerable. They could be as high as 40%, and we've seen some with 12%. This is just about the device and those 8 ways of attacking. These imaging centers had almost 200 procedures being performed a year. So a lot of patient exposures, if you will. Now we know that imaging devices are highly integrated. They probably are connected to PACS, VNA, etc. in the lens setting. They're connected to the radiology information system, EHR, and storage via wide area network. There are linkages to scheduling and ordering applications. At the end, the images are being viewed by radiologists somewhere else. Doctors review the reports in other facilities or other entities. It's a very convoluted environment, if you will. So in general, there are many moving parts here that can be subject to cyber attacks. For example, in the wireless LAN, there are chances of sniffing and spoofing attacks. Open DICOM and lack of encryption could open up paths to network-based attack, so on and so forth. Also, an attack in one area would create considerable care disruptions. You may have to reschedule patients, diversions, you get the point. What is, however, interesting is that most places would have some level of security configurations to protect the system. So if you ask the operators, they likely say their cybersecurity is pretty well covered. We still see cyber incidents. So for example, we talked about all the breaches, health record breaches have happened. Most healthcare systems have had some level of cybersecurity. So why do those breaches happen? The research show that there are many misconfiguration-centric vulnerabilities. And these are beyond zero-day brand new attack vectors, if you will. For example, in your integrated environment, you could have faulty scripting. People could delay the patching activity. You could still be using default passwords. There are chances of having incorrect permissions. There are chances of having deactivated or faulty firewall configurations, so on and so forth. So there are many reasons and many misconfigurations that could still lead to cyber events, if you will. So in other words, the perception says that security is well covered, but in reality, there are many open vulnerabilities. The best analogy is of Target or Equifax. I'm sure both of these organizations had budgets and security teams. And if you ask them any point in time, they would have said they have cybersecurity covered well. They, however, still face attack. In case of Equifax, it was delayed patching. In healthcare, 60% of breaches have insider involvement in some degree, whether intended or unintended. 78% of the times, people never think about misconfiguration or maybe insider-led errors. So the rule is we should always trust our teams, but verifying just helps everyone, isn't it? So we must ask what leads to misconfigurations. There are many factors. Individual-centric factors could be that person lacks knowledge or doesn't have experience or just does not care. In case of medical devices, operators are not always versed in IT and security. They are clinicians or clinical engineers. So knowledge and experience in IT and security will certainly be a concern here. There are environmental factors. For example, there is only one person who has to think about network design, devices, maintenance, security, all of that. The chances of error increases a lot in that scenario. At times, QA process isn't there, or people are overworked, or lack of good processes. Many of these can be addressed via leadership engagement because they speak to the resource-centric areas. Cybersecurity is an area where we have seen very little leadership engagement. And it has this mentality of, hey, if I have a problem, I call the expert. Expert takes pride in solving the problem. He or she fixes the problem and goes away. Leaders are engaged to understand the cause of the problem, the risk, the efforts needed, resources, etc. As a result, when there's a budget pressure, they have a hard time supporting because they can't understand it well enough. Another reason is system-related factors. For example, overly complex system and network. This is also an area where if clinicians and other cross-functional players were involved, right trade-offs can be made and behaviors can be set. So in a nutshell, individual-centric factors can be addressed by better training and is absolutely necessary. However, environment and system factors require a program approach where there are periodic reviews, where leaders are engaged to understand the risk, the resources, the consequences, etc. It truly calls for a cultural change. And culture is mostly influenced and addressed by the leader. So again, pause here and think about it. Do you really need fancy tools, or do you need programs? And what we've learned is technology and tools help you deliver a good program and outcome, not other way around. And unfortunately, many times we start the conversation with the tools, not with the program overall. And that is a cause of a concern. So if you know misconfigurations happen often, how do you find out about them early enough? And there are three ways to detect them. The first one, detection due to an incident. Once an attack happens, we would know, but that's after the fact. Intrusion detection helps here, and knowing that an attack has happened early enough, we can actually contain the impact fast. So that's a value there. The second one, accidental detection. Example would be that someone passes by a device and notices an open USB port. It, however, requires people to have an eye to find those problems. That's not possible without having knowledge about what to look for. Increasing accidental detection is all about having a culture and training for security, so people know what to look for. Third, detection during an audit. The obvious question here is, how often do we perform a detailed audit? And what happens between the two audit points? This is an area that can be addressed by good policy or a process, if you will. So let's look at a real example. This could be considered a case of detection due to an incident. In a Midwest-based health system, their CT system's access key had been expired. In other words, the console was internet connected, but wasn't password protected. So a janitor who used to clean the area in the evening would occasionally check his emails from this terminal. Once he became victim of a phishing attack, the screen popped up requiring $600 to unlock the system. They had to turn the system down and bring the CT for 3 days. It probably costed them more than $20,000 of lost revenue and probably some bad patient experience due to diversions. In short, cybersecurity is a cross-functional sport in execution. You have to have operators like clinicians involved. You need clinical engineers who understand the regulations on medical devices as well as operations of medical devices. You need IT and security personnel who could design the network but also bring good security tools and practices. You need regulatory and compliance team members because they're accountable for enterprise risk. You also need sourcing personnel, believe it or not. If you knew that capital equipment had less of operating system lifecycle available during the time of purchasing, would you negotiate different terms? Bet you would. So you need all these players to come together to ensure cybersecurity is managed appropriately in an organization. So now we talked about three things. Likelihood of cyber attacks is only increasing. Medical device cybersecurity requires very specific considerations. There is no silver bullet. It requires programmatic approach to manage it. It's not about the tools, it's about the program, culture, supported by the tools. If a vendor ever tells you that his solution will solve all your problems, smile and ask, what would you still have us contribute beyond just the cost or the price? So how do we operationalize cybersecurity of medical devices? We're in healthcare, and so I should use a healthcare analogy. We've all started to do annual checkups for preventive measures, haven't we? I'm sure some would still take a risk of finding out things late, but we prefer the preventive approach. We go to our primary care doc, hit first do physical, ask for imaging such as mammogram, order lab work, etc. The results would tell you what vulnerabilities and risks that we have. It's no different for medical devices. We have to first ask, what devices do we have and where they are? How many of those devices are vulnerable at a given point in time? What type of vulnerabilities does each device have? Some at the device level, such as operating system, software, firmware, etc. Network level vulnerabilities, process related, policy related, and more importantly, what are the associated threats and risks with them? To get good answers, you have to ask good questions. If you ever ask someone, do you have a cybersecurity covered? If they had some practices included, the likely answer is yes. We have a cybersecurity expert and we clearly care about it. If you however ask a different question, how many of your medical devices are vulnerable? Now you know how well it is covered, isn't it? Once the doc knows what risk we have, he or she would say either go to a hospital right away, or you need a surgery, or you're fine with just the medications, or you're just fine. The doc wouldn't say, hey, take antibiotics because it works in most of the cases, would he? Well, similarly, once the vulnerabilities are known for each device, you'd figure out the best security control considering the security risk, patient safety risk, and more importantly, cost of the strategy. This helps in ROI mindset. You want to make sure the control that you put in is both effective and cost efficient. The control could be patching, access management, VLAN, network segregation, process, or policy changes. You get the point. Then you must ask, or we must ask, do we have an institutionalized process of implementation that avoids misconfigurations with a cross-functional engagement? Because we know that could be a problem. So the ROI mindset is very critical. We know what's measured gets managed, and more importantly, gets supported. For example, let's say you went to your CFO and talked about medical device cybersecurity. He agreed to fund you, and you implemented a program. But you never showed him how well the program is working or what has been the ROI. If you remain curious that money that he allocated was really put for a good use or not, you'll know that soon. When there is a budget pressure, he would have a very hard time defending your needs versus something that he knows to have an outcome. So the questions usually you gotta ask is, do I have top leadership team engaged? Do I have periodic reviews set with them? Do I have a mechanism to measure effectiveness of program? Can I show them how much risk is retired with our efforts? What's still remaining? Have a discussion and debate about whether to mitigate those risks or assume those risks, or what will it take? Do we have a continuous monitoring of risk and an improvement philosophy? Can we show ROI on a regular basis to gain the support? All these points are very important in organizational engagement, support, and the vitality of the program. Governance and leadership is critical. Always ask these questions that we just talked about it. So operationalizing cybersecurity in the most effective form is about taking a programmatic approach. We hear a lot about artificial intelligence in cybersecurity. I have done a blog on that, it's posted. But overall, I think it needs more time to truly be effective. And good question to ask here is, what level of accuracy can be achieved? What kind of false positives are expected? If you study target breach case, you'll see that intrusion detection systems from two different vendors had sent many alerts. Then why do you think target security team did not respond to them? We must pause and think. Why did they ignore those alerts? Could it be possible that in the past they had seen many false positives? Artificial intelligence or AI is a buzzword. It has many applications. It also has applications in cybersecurity as well. We just have to know what the best use case is for given or expected outcome. So far, we talked about again, high likelihood of cyber attacks. Medical device security requires specific consideration. There is no silver bullet. It requires a programmatic approach. And finally, operationalize a cybersecurity with ROI mindset because it's critical. The next question is, are you ready to lead? You saw that it's not about leading just a procurement of a tool. It requires building a program, influencing the organization, guiding them, etc. It's all about leadership. Following leadership traits are critical to lead. Learning agility. You must engage in an ecosystem, engage with vendors, ask good questions, and synthesize an approach that fit your own context. The field moves too fast. Thinking that you know and you'll have all answers yourself is never going to work. Second, courage. To stand up and say that we need a cybersecurity program itself requires courage. Most people talked about things in private, but lack the confidence to take the initiatives. Empathy. Most of us have within healthcare, just plain and simple, is given. However, professional courtesy, internally and externally, is important. It goes to the point around learning agility. You never know when you need support from an individual, whether inside or outside organization. Being empathetic will only create your cheerleaders and supporters. In our busy schedule, we can easily trade that off. So good to be mindful of that. Credibility. It's all about do say. Showing small results and outcome will always help. It allows people to bet on you. They know that you'll follow through. Decisiveness. We often want all the pieces to come together to move forward. But I've never seen a leader who had all the answers. They take small steps. They pilot it. They do demos. They decide to take small risk and show outcomes. And they manage the risk. They show results. They learn from it and then decide the future direction. But they're always moving forward rather than being stuck. And these are the three ingredients that are going to be necessary not only for cybersecurity, but just leading in the digital age. We all got to go after it. So again, it calls for incredible leadership. And I want to put these things in perspective, the things that we've actually talked about. Increasing probability of cyber events. Cybersecurity of medical devices is going to require specific consideration. There is no silver bullet. It requires a programmatic approach and a focus on culture as well. Operationalize cybersecurity with ROI mindset, because that's what's going to give you effectiveness as well as cost efficiency. And all of this requires incredible amount of leadership. So now continue to reflect on how frequently would you think about cybersecurity in your world? And is your organization truly prepared to handle these growing threats? Now, here are a couple of plugs that I want to do. Healthcare is very personal, and there are many thought leaders. We've just launched Healthcare Igniters as a channel. This is where thought leaders with 10x impact potential could come and briefly discuss those ideas. So if you're one of those, please reach out. We'd love to showcase your ideas and tune in to listen to some of them. They would be very educational. The last one is, first of all, look, I'm available to answer any questions personally outside it. Please reach out. If you just want to bounce off ideas, I'm available. If you want to have a discussion on trade-offs, we could do that as well. I think this is very close to heart, and we want to make sure our communities are safe and secure. So thank you, and enjoy the beautiful clear water.